Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. Today, we're excited to have special guest, Dr. Robert Bobby Blumofe, who is an executive VP and maybe the executive VP and Chief Technology Officer for Akamai Technologies. Akamai had 2022 revenues of $3.6 billion, almost 10,000 employees, and they're really focused on, I'd say, improving internet experiences. We'll hear more about that. But they've deployed highly distributed content delivery networks called CDNs. They have about 350,000 servers in 134 countries, over 1,300 networks around the world. So broad reach. Dr. Blumofe joined in 1999, so very early employee as part of this growth story, and is key in designing their intelligent edge platform, which handles 1 trillion internet requests a day. So look forward to hearing more about that. Welcome, and so much. Thanks for joining us, Bobby.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is a great opportunity, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all.
Wonderful. So for those that aren't familiar, could you tell us a little bit about the history, sort of the DNA of Akamai?
Well, you summarized things very nicely. That was a great way to kick things off. Yeah, I'd like to start by pointing out that 2023 actually represents the 25th anniversary of the company. The company was founded out of MIT in 1998. It was late summer of 1998. I joined about midsummer of the next year of 99, as you pointed out. But that makes this year, 23, the 25th anniversary of the company, which is amazing. And to your question about, what is Akamai and how would you describe Akamai? One thing about these 25 years is that the answer to that question has actually changed. It's a story of growth, but also a story of a lot of change. And which probably isn't all that surprising given how much the internet has changed and how much our world has changed in these last 25 years. But if I was to try and describe where we are today in 2023, I think the succinct answer would be that we're a cloud company. We're the cloud company that powers and protects life online. And of course, life online today is kind of synonymous with life today. It's hard to imagine living a life without a significant online components. Everything depends on online capabilities. Even mundane things, buying food or getting healthcare, requires an online component. Sometimes I describe that to people as sort of the negative aspect of that, which is that, we're living in a world where you may find that one day you can't buy food or you can't get healthcare because some service online that you've never even heard of is having some kind of problem, maybe a performance problem, maybe an outage, maybe an attack, maybe a ransomware attack or something like that. So these days, a life well lived kind of requires an online life well lived. And that strong connection between online and life is why we believe that by doing what we're doing, we're able to fulfill what we consider our purpose, which is to make life better for billions of people, billions of times a day. And by billions of people, I'm referring to basically the who's who of our enterprise customer base, which allows us to interact with literally billions of people every day. And you mentioned the number of transactions that we execute a day. So we say billions of times a day, and that's speaking to the scale at which we operate. Now, as you correctly pointed out, we could actually say trillions of times a day, but repeating the word billions actually sounds better in our purpose statement. So making life better for billions of people, billions of times a day. And underlying all that is this thing that we call the Akamai Connected Cloud, which is a massively distributed and scalable cloud that supports content delivery, security, and computing, and cloud computing. So maybe that's the simplest way to think of Akamai today is this Akamai Connected Cloud platform, which supports content delivery, security, cybersecurity, and computing.
Terrific. Yeah, by the way, I'm just super grateful to have a hybrid life where I can get some of the groceries delivered online and I can go to the farmer's market. So that's my vision of the ideal future, is being able to do both securely. Could you give some examples, maybe just a couple of examples of sort of specifically what it is that you do to make all that possible?
Well, as you pointed out, it's really built on this highly distributed platform. Hundreds of thousands of servers distributed all around the world in well over 1,000 locations, 100 and something countries. And by operating this distributed infrastructure, and you can really think of it as basically a highly distributed cloud all of which is delivered to our customers in a software as a service manner. In fact, given that the company goes back these 25 years, and we've been doing this idea of a distributed infrastructure that is offered as software as a service. I sometimes say that we were cloud before anybody used that word cloud, and we were software as a service before anybody used the phrase SaaS. But that's really at the core, highly distributed cloud SaaS. And it started with this idea of content delivery, which was really invented. And I think it's safe to say that Akamai back in 98, 99, when the company was founded, really invented this idea of a content delivery network. And today, I think it's safe to say that a content delivery network is used pretty ubiquitously, whether it's Akamai or somebody else. Almost everything you're doing online is being facilitated through a content delivery network. And we invented the content delivery network back then to solve what was then called the worldwide wait. There was this concern that the growing popularity of the web was going to create an implosion that just wouldn't scale. The invention of the CDN is by and large a big factor in what has allowed the web to scale as it has. And the idea was to use math and algorithms in this distributed form to deliver content in a highly scalable and highly performant manner. And that's what the CDN is. Since then, we've adapted this infrastructure to now also support cybersecurity, so we can protect our customers using the same platform. So we can block attacks, we can classify interactions as whether or not they're coming from humans or bots, and what kinds of bots and things like that. And most recently, computing. We've used our platform as a computing platform for a long time, what we called edge computing. We adopted this term edge computing a long, long time ago. And most recently, with the acquisition of Linode, which was basically a core cloud computing platform, we now are combining edge computing and core computing into one computing platform. And that's why I can say content delivery plus security plus computing, one platform. And that's the Akamai Connected Cloud.
Terrific. Part of the amazing thing for me about your story as an organization is how you've evolved successfully right over these 25 years to get to the place that you are today. As you say, SaaS didn't exist.
Yeah, nobody used that. Yeah, you've never. Yeah, nobody used that phrase then.
Yeah. And now it's such a key, both in terms of how we operate and such a wonderful business model. So that's sort of the history. If we look forward, what do you think? Given your position, I'm expecting that you'll have a position on this. What do you think the future of cloud computing looks like, and how is it evolving today?
Well, I characterize the future of cloud as a redistribution of compute. And that's the phrase I've been using, redistribution of compute. And I would say, by and large, the advent of cloud has created sort of a centralization of compute. And the advent of cloud has been one of the most remarkable innovations of the last decade or so. It's really changed everything. And as somebody who has used computing for so many years, and also as a hobbyist, back then, as a hobbyist, if you wanted to do anything with compute, you had to get yourself a server, find co-location, get a place where you can install it, give it power, install an operating system, and it would take you days just to get the basic infrastructure in place. With the cloud, you can now literally in a handful of minutes, a handful of clicks, you've got a server provisioned. It's connected to the internet. It has an IP address. It has an OS installed. And in some cases, even potentially key applications already installed. That just happens with a few button clicks. It used to take us days to do stuff like that. And oftentimes iteration after iteration because something wasn't installed right. You didn't have all kinds of stuff. So the cloud has been remarkable, but for better or worse, a big consequence of that is really sort of a centralization of compute. And I don't mean just from the point of view of the names of which companies you're doing your compute with. I mean also physically. For the most part, the cloud companies that you know of, they offer a handful of locations, a few tens of locations. And as a customer, you'll typically pick 1, 2, maybe 3 locations, and you'll provision all of your compute and storage in those 1, 2, 3 locations. So you're doing all of your compute in a very sort of centralized fashion. And that's good for a lot of things, by the way, especially when you're computing on large data sets. So if you have a database or a data lake or something like that, and you want to be computing on that large data set, yes, it makes sense to do it right there with the data. But for some compute that you're doing where you're interacting with users who are distributed, maybe even around the world, if at least around your country, probably, but maybe even around the world, you're interacting with devices, maybe user devices, but also IoT types of devices, potentially all over the world. And that centralized model doesn't work for everything. So it's important for applications that are interacting with users and devices that might be distributed around to have components of the computation not centralized, but rather distributed. I oftentimes say that the rule of thumb is move your compute to the data, not vice versa. Don't backhaul your data to the computation, move your compute to where the data is. So again, if you've got centralized data in a warehouse or in a data lake, great, centralize your computing. But if you're computing on traffic flows and trying to interact with users and devices, you need some components of your computation out near those devices. And that's what we call the edge. That's computing at the edge. So the net of the answer is we need to redistribute computation so that it's not all centralized as the cloud has sort of forced, but rather decentralized so that it's near the users and devices that we're interacting with.
Great. And so you're seeing that as sort of either a wish or a trend in terms of what's happening today. People are moving in that direction.
Yeah, well, certainly this is something, of course, that we're doing. We've been supporting edge as a computation model, that is being able to do compute near the users and devices. We've done that for decades now. But we're now also combining that with this core capability that we acquired from Linode. So you have edge and core. So we're certainly doing that. And that's what the Akamai Connected Cloud is really all about. But I would say other companies are also moving in that direction. I think it's safe to say that many of the large cloud computing companies are over time increasingly adding more and more locations and trying to facilitate the possibility of compute that is as near as possible to users and devices.
Okay, absolutely. And I expect that's clear for people in terms of the difference of what compute and edge are. It certainly helped me understand that a lot better. Thank you.
Good. Okay.
So what's next for Akamai in that environment? So, in terms of application innovation.
Yeah, I think that this idea of core plus edge, where you can locate compute where the data is and where it makes sense, does open up some possibilities in terms of application innovation. That's really, I guess, what it's all about. These platforms are really there to facilitate applications and innovation. So one way to think about that is to think about applications that have this component of interaction and low latency interaction with users and devices. So think, for example, where you're doing real-time interaction with other people or real-time interaction with virtual environments. You could also be thinking about applications where you're using machine learning to do real-time classification. So machine learning is a great example here where you've got an offline centralized component, which is the training. You've got lots and lots of data and you need to train a model. That's what machine learning starts with. It starts with training, where you take lots of data and you train a model. And that can be very centralized because you're collecting data into a centralized location and you're using that to train your model. Once you have a model, you then use it to do classification. So you can think of a machine learning model as essentially a piece of code that looks at instances. It looks at, maybe an image or images. It looks at images or looks at data coming out of sensors, and the model then classifies what it sees. So it could classify an image as to what kind of image it is, or it could classify sensor data as whether or not it's some kind of anomaly or something like that. And oftentimes classification, you want to do that with very, very low latency. So a device out there sees an image and you want to classify that image instantly, low latency. Or a sensor detects, it's constantly detecting what's going on in the environment. It's sending that data and you want to rapidly trigger if it sees anything that looks anomalous. And that's what machine learning classification does for you. And it's critical then that classification occurs at the edge, near the devices, near the image, the image capturing devices, near the sensors, so that you can classify the data very, very quickly. So I think So net, I think what I'm saying is that these types of applications where you need rapid interaction with users and devices, low latency, do require this additional component. You can't do it just with core. You actually can't do it just with edge. You need this combination. You want to combine core with edge. And one more thing I would say about this is I think this idea is leading to a new sort of application architecture where you essentially hollow out the device. Let me explain what I mean by that. Is, today where you're centralizing your compute, the only other place where you can really locate compute is in the device itself, whether it's a user's laptop or a sensor or something like that. But that comes at a cost. Maintaining software in a device like an IoT type of device, or even on a laptop, has a cost. Trying to maintain it, trying to update it, keep it free from bugs, keep it free from vulnerabilities that could be exploited by attackers. There's real cost to that. And I think where we can go, the opportunity here with this new cloud computing model, is that you can hollow out the device. So think of a device out there that might be acting with the environment. That device the software on that device can literally be nothing more than what you need to transduce, if you will. Basically translate between the physical environment and some piece of data that then needs to be acted on. The actual acting on that data doesn't have to happen on the device anymore. Today, you might do that on the device because you didn't have this other option. But better is to hollow out the device. The software on the device can be super simple. It does nothing but transduce between the environment and digital information, and leave all of the intelligence to happen in the cloud. And you can now do that at the edge, where you can now do it at low latency. So I would say a modern application architecture is going to involve hollowing out of the device at the end user device or the end IoT device, and putting all of the compute in the cloud, combining core and edge.
So low latency is key here, right? Which may be one of the reasons that hasn't happened before.
Yeah.
And I hope this is not too naive a question, but will that bring us finally the promise of 5G being able to, because that's now available to us in many locations, that we can have low latency?
Yeah, I think 5G can be an enormous enabler for this, because ultimately, if you're going to hollow out the device, the connectivity is critical. The device has to be able to communicate to the edge of the internet. It doesn't have to. Don't worry about getting all the way to the core, because again, we're not going to backhaul the data all the way to the core. We're going to do our compute at the edge, but you still have to get from the device to the edge, and that's where 5G can really play a big role.
Perfect. All right, thanks. So I'd like to turn now to you and your leadership a bit. So you've been at Akamai now for over 2 decades, and as I said, 3.6 billion in annual revenue last year. How have you grown and helped your team navigate growth from a leadership standpoint?
Well, I've tried to focus my attention with the teams that I've led on basically creating an environment where the ensemble can really thrive. I'm a big believer in the power of the ensemble. And that ultimately means that you're putting together great teams with great culture, great teams and great culture. And obviously when we talk about a great team, the individuals do matter. You need to bring together individuals who are basically have the right qualities and the right sensibilities and the right, I guess, DNA maybe is part of it as well. A whole bunch of qualities have to come together, but it needs to come together in the context of the ensemble. This isn't about individual star power. It's about creating great individuals who can work very well in this ensemble environment. And, and then you've, of course, got the cultural aspect of it. And, and I think that's so important. Oftentimes, when I'm interviewing people, the technical qualifications, you can get that on a resume. But what I really need to understand is this somebody that I'm really going to enjoy working with? Are they going to fit in as part of the ensemble? Are they going to fit in with the culture? And when I say, am I going to have fun working with them? I take that very seriously. That's an important part of it. And culture, there has to be some fun in the culture. Actually, let me say a couple of words about culture, because I think about this a lot, especially with the 25-year history of Akamai, because it's changed a lot. With 25 years, culture changes. And that's a good thing. It's like language. It's a living, breathing thing. Culture should change. But at Akamai, at least, there are certain core things about the culture that really have not changed, that the sort of bedrock elements of the culture. And I honestly trace much of that bedrock quality all the way back to one of our 2 co-founders, Danny Lewin. So some of you may know Danny Lewin was one of the 2 co-founders of the company. He was killed on 9/11. But the extraordinary thing about, well, many extraordinary things about Danny, but Danny was really a very, very powerful influence on the culture of the company. It was the
Mm,
kind of person he was. And one of the remarkable things is that he created a company with a culture that was actually able to outlive him. And not everybody can,
it's
can
amazing.
boast that.
Yeah.
But when I think about what are those elements of the culture that were so essential to getting through all of that and allowed us to thrive for 25 years through all this change, two things: tenacity and humor. Tenacity and humor.
Mhm.
And Danny had those things in spades. And he talked a lot about tenacity, and how important it was. Tenacious as hell. He used that phrase a lot. We were tenacious as hell. And he wouldn't explicitly talk about humor, but Danny was a pretty funny guy. And I don't mean that he was just constantly a jokester or anything like that.
Mhm.
He could play jokes. He did like a good practical joke, but it was that he was an easy laugh. He was just sort of generous with his laughter and with his humor and with his smile, and just generous with the people around him to create an environment where we could all smile, where we could all laugh, and we could all have fun. And I think that is so important in a culture. And when you combine those things, tenacity and humor, you got a winning culture. And we've maintained that all throughout the 25 years. And it's allowed us to not only get through some very difficult times, not the least of which was Danny being killed on 9/11, but there's been many other challenges as well, but also through all the change. Change can be really difficult for people. And especially
Mm,
when you're talking about really profound change and having to pivot from one type of business to another type of business and building new things, that can be very daunting for people. But with tenacity and humor, you can get through those things.
yeah. Well, tenacity is not a word I hear very often when I ask people about their culture, right? With bias for action, right? Let's get things done. But sort of the hanging on and seeing it through, so important for longevity. I also wanted to ask you about curiosity. I imagine as a CTO, curiosity to be part of your DNA. How has that helped you on your leadership journey? Sort of this role of curiosity and continuous learning.
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I really do love, always I've loved learning new things, and I don't know where that came from, but it's ever since I was very, very young. I've just always loved learning new things, and to this day, I've always got some hobbies that I'm pursuing, and they've changed throughout my life. Because it's not like these hobbies are things where I'm trying to become world class at any particular thing, but I want to learn and sort of fill in my knowledge about things. So sometimes it's physical things. I've at times been worked on, playing music, or lately I've been working on juggling. So that's a
Oh,
interesting thing
cool.
to try
Yeah.
and do. And other times it's technical things, or other sorts of things. I've spent time, learning about history, or most recently I've been playing with audio amplifier circuits.
Mm,
No particular reason. I just have always liked
yeah.
learning. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things I've loved about my career at Akamai, is that the company has been changing, and it's given me the opportunity to learn new things and use that learning in a meaningful context to do something that really matters. And so I oftentimes think nowadays that for those of us who are lucky enough to be in a position like this, that the modern career should be thought of as a multi-career. Don't think
Mm,
career, think
yeah.
multi-career. And that's a phrase I'm starting to use more and more. Think multi-career. And when I give advice to younger people, I'm thinking, don't think so much about preparing for, again, this is if you're in such a lucky position. Don't think so much about preparing for a career. Think about preparing for a multi-career. And that means learning how to learn, foster your own curiosity, and learn how to learn new things. Because if you're lucky enough, you're going to learn new things throughout your entire life. And you'll, rather than having a career, you have a multi-career.
Yeah. I think about it as creating options,
Mm.
right? It's like when people ask me, what do I like to read? The answer is yes,
Yeah,
right? It's just a matter of time. And so, but how do we in our careers just create options, because we don't know what's going to be needed next. But if I
yeah,
can create a multitude, I can have a multi-career. That's a terrific
exactly. Yeah,
phrase. Thank you. So I look back sort of at, if I think about my career, right, when I was fortunate enough to start at Compact Computer as a startup, it was just right place, right time, not in a happy position where I was, no reason not to take a chance at that point. Was there a moment in your career when you knew that you would be successful? The tagline for my business is up and to the right, because that's the spot on the 2 by 2 matrix where we always want to be. Was there a moment in your career when you knew you were moving up and to the right?
well, I mean, I think there's been many. This idea of sort of up and to the right. Obviously, It'd be easy to maybe mistakenly conflate that metaphor with the idea that a career is a monotonic thing, which obviously it isn't.
Absolutely
It
not.
has turns. And so when you use that phrase, what I'm thinking about is episodes during that twisty turny
Yes.
journey when you have felt like you were really in the right place at the right time. You're part of a great ensemble doing great things that really matter to people. And I've been lucky enough that there's been multiple of those. But if I had to pick one, I'm going to maybe pick maybe a little bit unusual, which was, I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was several years into my time at Akamai. And at that time, our CEO was our first CEO, George Conrades. And I had relatively recently been promoted to the point where I was now sort of part of the leadership team, where I regularly
Mhm.
found myself around a table with George and the leadership team. And the particular episode was when he actually gave me a bit of a dressing down about having blown a goal that was actually related to capacity at the time. I was responsible for network build out and capacity, and he gave me a little bit of a dressing down. And I'm a little cautious about telling the story because I don't want people to think that George was in any way mean. In fact, anybody who knows George knows that he's not the kind of guy who would punch down. It's just not who
Mhm.
he is. What he really meant with this, and the way I took it, is it was very much setting expectations. And in many ways, it was acknowledging that I belonged at that table. Because he wouldn't, if
Mhm.
I didn't belong at that table, he simply I would have been gone. I would,
Yeah.
it was very much an acknowledgement that I truly belonged to that table. And he was setting an expectation of what you needed to do to be part of that table. And that's how I read it. And I'm sure that's how he meant it. Because again, he's not the kind of guy who would be punching down.
Mhm.
He was sending a strong message. And I knew, it was really, that's how I took it. I mean, it was a challenge. It was like I did not want to let this
Mhm.
guy down. I mean, I was going to deliver for him, but I really felt like he would not have spoken to me in that way if he wasn't treating me as a real member of that table.
Wow, terrific story. Thank you. And by the way, completely different from how anyone else has ever answered that question when I've asked. So I love that as well. Well, Bobby, thank you so much for joining us. I think we both learned a lot about your organization, certainly about technology and the future, and love your stories around your leadership. Thank you so much.